Welcome to Aurora Public Library's virtual living room, where we're about to spend time with Farzana Doctor, writer, activist, and psychotherapist. My name is Risha Mandelkorn, and I have the pleasure of hosting this evening's event. Before we begin, I would like to offer a land acknowledgement. And as I speak, I will be thinking about the remains of the 215 children found in the grounds of the Kamloops Indian Residential School in British Columbia. We are all immigrants and children of immigrants to Canada. We gratefully acknowledge the original caretakers of this land. We acknowledge the philosophy behind the Dish with One Spoon Treaty. This contract is a peace agreement made between Indigenous nations before the Europeans arrived. The Dish with One Spoon Treaty binds people on this land to share with their neighbors so that we may all have enough. There is one dish, one spoon, and no knife. In that spirit, we honor all who came before us, our own ancestors, as well as all the Indigenous caretakers, named and unnamed, recorded and unrecorded. We'll begin this evening with a few questions, followed by a short reading from 7 by Farzana, and then we'll open up the Q&A to what I know will be a lively and important conversation. Please feel free to start submitting your questions or share your comments at any time through the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. I will be recording this event as part of the library's archive of author events. Farzana Doctor is a celebrated and award-winning Canadian author whose books are seen on the best of lists every year. She has published 4 novels to date, including 6 Meters of Pavement, which won a Lambda Literary Award and was shortlisted for the Toronto Book Award. Since its publication last year, 7 has been found on many year-end lists of 2020's top novel and has just been nominated for the prestigious Trillium Book Award and the Evergreen Book Award. While all Farzana's books are distinct from one another, common themes in her writing include loss, relationships, community, healing, racism, 2S LGBTQ rights, diasporic identity, and feminism. She seamlessly blends strong stories with social justice issues. And it's my absolute pleasure and honor to welcome Farzana Doctor. Welcome, Farzana.
Hi, Risha. Thanks so much for having me. And thank you, Lucy, who's in the background handling the tech stuff as well. Just going to move this because I think the sun's coming in now.
Are you good? We are good. So Farzana, you come from, I'm going to start off with some questions. You come from a place of writing and of activism. And every one of your books, and I've read them all, speaks to an important aspect of the human condition. And yet we never feel beaten up, even when the subject matter is as heavy as it is in 7. So how do you keep the balance that lets us breathe and laugh under the weight of the important conversations that you're bringing to the reader?
Thank you. I'm so glad that nobody feels beaten up. And that is so important to me. You know, I know that when I'm reading other novels, it's really important for me to learn about some of the important and difficult issues that are behind the books. You know, that's how I think we all build empathy. And I also want to have a good time. I want to have a good experience. I want to be perhaps distracted from my life. And so I did work very hard, and I have with all of my books, I've worked very hard to pay really close attention to the flow of the novel. So, you know, mixing in wittiness, you know, funny, quirky characters, relatable kinds of relationship issues all throughout, so that the difficult issues sort of becomes embedded within a larger story that I think is, you know, more relatable or universal. So it's very much paying attention to the flow and not keeping people in the hard stuff too long.
So Farzana, as we all know, families are complicated. Relationships are complicated. Religion is complicated. So in 7, you tell the narrative with great sensitivity to every single character that you're describing, but Knowing your passion for supporting women's rights, was it a challenge to create nuanced characters? I don't know that I would have, well, I can't write like you either, but I don't know if I would have been so compassionate to all of the different sides and made them all so real.
Yeah, when I first started writing the book, I was at the very beginnings of my own activism around female genital cutting, and I probably was just writing my anger. But I am I should say, I've been born into the Dawadi Bora community, and I'm part of a Dawadi Bora family. And I know that we're all kinds of things. We're very serious and we're very silly. Some of us are orthodox, some of us are not, some of us are kinder. We're just a range, like every community. And as I was writing some of the characters, particularly the characters who have different points of view than I have around some of the issues, I started to develop more empathy and more nuance for all of the points of view. And I think that's kind of important, when we're looking at any social norm or difficult issue in a community. In order for anything to change, we really have to be quite understanding. We can't villainize people if we're going to have good conversations. So, the most conservative characters in the book are also beloved aunts. Our parents, our loving cousins, all of that kind of thing. And I think that's actually the reality of our lives, is that very few people in reality are villains. Maybe small numbers are, but most of us are flawed human beings who maybe need more information, more education to be able to change.
So, can you speak to the feedback that you've received both from the Bora and the non Bora communities?
So, I wasn't really sure what was going to happen with this book because I'm writing about an issue that is very taboo, very difficult to speak about. Um, but I have heard from some Bora women, people who have said, reading this book, it was the first time that I've been able to process these issues in my own life, the first time I've been able to talk to my mother, to my cousins about it. And that's very heartwarming, because I know from my own experience that this is a very difficult issue to broach. It's about trauma, and it's about sexuality. These are very taboo issues to talk about. And then from non-Boras, a couple of different reactions. I've heard people say, I didn't experience that kind of trauma, but I did experience another form of trauma. And I found myself processing my own stuff by reading your book. I've also heard from a lot of people who have asked for more information, who've wanted to get involved in some of the activism, who didn't know that this was an issue that was happening in India, didn't know that it's an issue that's happening in Canada. So I feel like this book has become a vehicle for being able to normalize this conversation, which is what we need to do. The more we normalize a conversation like this, the more we're able to change things.
So, as a psychotherapist, which is really interesting that you're both an author, psychotherapist, and activist, I know that you understand the importance of triggers for trauma. So, is this something that you considered when you were actually writing the book? And did you look for feedback from sensitivity readers on this?
Mhm. Yeah, I don't so much think about triggers for books, because I don't feel like you can control any of that. It's really up to the reader to decide if they want to read, how they want to read. But my therapist hat did come on at various points in the book, because I wanted to I think I wanted to share some information. I think there's a lot of misconceptions about how trauma works, how trauma is remembered, and how trauma impacts us. So I was very clear in my mind that anything that I presented for this character needed to be really sophisticated. I wanted to ensure that I wasn't reinforcing some of the myths. So that's where my my therapist hat came on. Where I used beta readers was more from some of the activists I know in the community. I wanted to make sure that how I was presenting things, was accurate, was going to have like was diverse in its representation. Also, while I was born in the Dowdy Bora community, and I am part of that community, there's a lot of things that I don't understand and I just don't know. And some of that happens, I think, in any religious community where maybe people don't question things, so they can't explain to children why we do things. We just do things because we do things. So I needed to check in with some of my pals about, is this how you spell that word? Is this how that religious ceremony actually would happen? I needed them to catch some of my mistakes around, accuracy around Dowdy Bora stuff.
So most of the questions I've been asking you so far are really from a literary perspective, but I would like to know more about your current work in community organizing. And you alluded to this already. I think many of us are very surprised to know that female genital cutting happens in India, in the United States, in Canada, in Australia, elsewhere. How do we learn more about this, and how do we work together to stop this?
Yeah, well, there's a very global, robust Nfgm community out there. There's a lot of activism happening, and there's been this very beautiful, in the last 5 years, almost a Me Too movement. So people are speaking out more, and I think that's really helpful, because the more people tell their stories, the more people will tell their stories, and then we normalize this conversation and it starts to shift. So just a few facts, because people might not know. It happens in 92 countries and counting. In the past, people really believed that it was only happening in parts of Africa and the Middle East, but it's everywhere. We know of white Christian survivors in the US who are coming forward. So the thing to know about female genital cutting is that it's just another form of patriarchal violence that exists. So it's on the same continuum as rape culture, as an example, or any other form of body policing. It's done really to control sexuality, as though that needs to be controlled. It doesn't. So that's how I like people to be able to normalize it and understand it, that it's not this weird thing that's happening in weird cultures and other places. It's not that. It's actually something that has been very cloaked, and it's been happening very quietly all around the world, in lots of different cultures, across all different religions. And the more we learn about it, the more we find this out. And in Canada, there's estimated to be about 100,000 survivors. So that means that it's somebody somebody in your workplace, someone in your neighborhood, in your school. And there's a newish organization called the Nfgmc Canada Network. People can find them at nfgm.ca. And they're trying to raise the profile of this issue in Canada, and to pressure the government to create a national action plan, so that there can be good services, good training out there, good supports for people.
So you were actually the narrator in the audio version of 7. Would you treat us to a reading from a section of the book?
I was only the narrator for the epilogue, just to give props to the two actors. Alora Patnaik read most of it, and Raul Baneja read the interludes where there's the Abdulali character. Because I auditioned to read the epilogue, and I only wanted to read the epilogue because I'm not an actor. And they do so well with like all the different voices and all of that, but I guess I will read. So in case anyone else is reading along, I'm just going to start at page 5. So just to give people a little bit of the synopsis, this is a story about Sharifa, who goes to India on a marriage-saving trip with her husband Mortaza and their 7-year-old daughter Z. And they're planning to, she thinks she's going to be spending her time doing research about a revered ancestor in her family and homeschooling her kid. But it's 2016 in Mumbai, and her community is in the midst of a really big debate about what they call khatna, and what the world and what feminists in India are calling female genital cutting. So this scene is before they go to India, and this is just to give you a little bit of a sense of the tone of this book, and also a little bit about her relationship with her husband, Mortaza. In the evening, Mortaza and I meet on the couch for the married person's evening ritual, TV. Along with a nightly bowl of microwave popcorn, we've been putting away 2 episodes of The Mindy Project after Z is in bed. We guffaw and cringe in the same places. We are diasporic South Asian children of immigrants communing over the embarrassing life of a diasporic South Asian child of immigrants. While the credits roll, Mortaza leans over, kisses my neck, and says, "Shall we turn it off now or watch another episode?" "Sure, Murthy, we can turn it off," I say, sensing his preference. After all, it is Saturday and 9 p.m. I'd prefer to hit play, to be distracted by someone else's awkward world, but I appreciate my husband's good-natured and consistent initiative taking. My friends and I talk about our lackluster sex lives and waning libidos, and I feel like I'm the lucky one amongst us. At least we can say we're still doing it, rather than being in couples therapy because we aren't, or breaking up because we aren't, or having extramarital affairs because we aren't. I'd never cheated in my life, neither on a test nor a timesheet. When my naturopath directed me to eliminate sugar, dairy, wheat, and caffeine last year to improve my immune system's functioning, I followed her instructions to the letter for 60 days. How to make sense of the affair then? It was just over 4 years ago when Z was 3. Ian, a guy I once slept with, friend requested me on Facebook. I recall experiencing a twinge of something, a flutter in my belly that I could have interpreted as a prescient warning. I brushed away the sensation and thought, nah, it's just Facebook, and it's been ages since we last saw each other. Plus, I'd heard from a friend in common that he'd moved to England. I thought we'd share a few likes, perhaps a little lurking, no problem. At the time, I couldn't admit to myself that it was cheating. There were no secret liaisons in 2.5-star motels we'd paid for in cash, nor no late night phone calls, no sexy photos. Leave it to me to have an affair without really having an affair. And I'm going to skip forward. And this is one of the interludes that is from the perspective of her great-great-grandfather. And these interludes sort of show the reader what Sharifa isn't finding out. So it's January 1866, South Bombay. 11-year-old Abdulali huddled under the yellow glow of a street lamp, his index finger pacing his labored reading. "The lion lives in the jungle," he whispered. "His roar is loud." An elderly fruit seller trudged by with an empty wooden cart pulled by a weary bullock. Just in time, Abdulali wrapped his legs around the post to avoid a heavy hoof landing on his toe. A fly, one of the bullock's many-winged passengers, hopped onto his hand and then onto the Hindi primary reader he had borrowed from Sunil, the 9-year-old boy of the family for whom he worked. He told his mother it was a gift. Did she believe the lie? Thinking of her, it seemed, could summon her. He looked up and saw her face framed in the window of the 3rd-floor room they shared with another widow and her 3 young children. She fanned herself with her orna. Despite the evening's cool, the day's heat lingered in the room. He waved to her and pleaded, 5 more minutes, Mummy? She nodded, her lips a straight line, but he knew she was proud of him, knew they had left the village for a better life, and for now, their better life was just this one nicked book about a lion in a jungle that he struggled, word by word, to understand. Thanks.
Well, thank you so much. I can't think of anything that I enjoy more than hearing an author read their own work, because it just takes on a whole different proportion even more. So thank you so very much for that. And now, Farzana, it's time for us to chat with our guests. And so I'm going to look into the Q&A and see if we have any questions. Please type your questions into the Q&A and I will pose them to Farzana. And while we're waiting for people to ask questions, I've got some in my back pocket.
Yeah,
One
and
of the
don't be
things
shy, people.
just go ahead and type in, but I'm going to start first because I actually do want to know this one. So Farzana, the face of Canada is changing, and with it, BIPOC authors are painting our literary canvases with fresh new strokes. Can you speak to what I think is such an exciting change in how we tell our stories?
Mm-hmm. It is beginning to change in this country, and I think that that's a really encouraging thing. I was reading this article. It was just about a year ago that documented that in the U.S., and I suspect it's similar here, only 5% of the total published works are by racialized authors. So we still, I think we have a long way to go. One of the places where I've seen really a big change has been in the way that the major awards have been given out to a lot of racialized authors, Indigenous authors, and people of color. And we think about how does this change? How do institutions change? The publishing industry is a kind of institution, especially the large publishers. They're very, very big, right? And it takes a lot of time for cultures to shift. We know this with every kind of organization out there. And I think one of the reasons it's changed with the awards is that the juries change every single year, and you can pick and choose who's going to be on the jury and be very conscious about ensuring that the jury has members from all different communities. And when you start to change the people who are in charge of making those kinds of decisions, I think the decisions begin to change. And so that's one of the really terrific places where I've noticed that. Like if you look at who's been given who's been awarded the Giller, or the Rogers Trust, or the Amazon First Novel Awards, like we're just seeing a real shift in those awards.
And as someone who's pretty much always only worked in the library business, it's about the only thing I've ever done except for being a camp counselor. I have never been as excited about Canadian literary fiction as I have been over the last few years. It's like a renaissance but it's not even a renaissance because it's something brand new that has happened. It's not even going back to anything. It's just exploded, and it's just very, very exciting for readers to be welcoming these kinds of books into our lives, and to have our lives reflected in these books as well.
Yes. Yes.
So I have a couple of comments here. People, put your questions in, but I have a few comments. I believe it's from Diane, and she just says hello to you. So I believe that she's probably somebody who you know. And I have another comment here, which is, I don't have a question, but I thought it was a terrific book. So there's another affirmation from one of our guests here. I have another question for you while we're waiting to see if our audience has any other questions. And this is from a writing perspective. As an author, can you talk a little bit about your writing process? And does the process change pending what you are writing? Because I know that you've got a YA book, you've got poetry. Is it more of a different approach pending on what you're writing, or is part of the whole craft?
So I feel like, my writing process has has shifted over time. I'm in this very beautiful position now. So how my life goes is my mornings are devoted to my writing life, and the afternoons are devoted to my psychotherapy work. And so that's lovely, right? That gives me, at least, 3-4 hours to be swimming in the writing life. So I would say that things shift based on where I am in the book's process. So when I'm just trying to do new writing, which is the most difficult part of the writing process for me, I will, sit at my desk and try to pump out 5 new pages a day. I'll get up, take the dog for a walk, come back and have a look at that work. If I'm in a revision stage, I will want to go on a retreat. I do a lot of DIY retreats where I will rent a drab hotel room. Drab hotel rooms are great for writing. um, and, just go, and I want to be like immersed in the story and nothing else for a week, so that I'm, noticing the connections and the inconsistencies and the, finding the problems. The poetry collection that I'm editing right now, which will come out next spring, this has been a very new experience for me. I've been writing poetry my whole life, but it's a very different thing to actually edit poetry to get ready for, for publication in a book. And so that's been different for me. Like I'm looking at different things. I'm learning new things. I feel like a beginner again with the poetry. So that's been different. In terms of YA versus adult, I don't feel like the process has been very different. I'm trying to remember what it was like to be a teenager as I'm trying to write that, but the actual sitting down and writing and just getting the pages out is very similar.
So you are absolutely going to love this next comment, and I'm actually going to mention the name of the person who has sent it. It's from Diane Office, and Diane says, "Hi Farzana, I recognized your name in an article promoting this evening, and I wanted to join today to say hello. I live in Aurora now, but I knew you when you were a child. I was your babysitter. I am anxious to read 7 and the rest of your books." How fantastic is
That's
that?
fantastic. I'm like, I don't recognize that surname, but I think I know who this is. Yeah. This is amazing, right? Because I'm 50 now. So we're talking about 40 years later. So thank you so much for being here and for reading the book. I really appreciate it.
The next question is from Elizabeth. Do you think that as a person who doesn't live in a marginalized community can comment on another community?
Comment, like comment, like write about another community. Is that kind of where the question is?
I don't know. I'm reading the
Or
question.
comment?
Elizabeth, do you want to send in another Q&A and maybe
Mhm.
expand on that? I think she means to make comment, not necessarily writing it, which you're
Yeah.
doing, and I don't mean to pass judgment, and I'm guessing what she means, but to have an opinion on another
Mm.
community. I think, but I might be wrong. I'll see if there's a follow-up.
I think when we're commenting about communities and experiences that are different from our own, we do have to exercise some caution, right? But not just caution. We need to exercise like love and respect and kindness. So when I want to give you an example, so um, for the issues in this book, sometimes people are very they feel like, oh, those issues are happening in those communities. I can't pass judgment. I can't comment on them. But I think the way that you can enter in the conversation is to know that you can be an ally to the people who are the change makers within any community. So with this issue, for example, you find the feminists, you find out what they're up to, and you amplify their messages. You learn from them. You do a lot of listening, that kind of thing. So it's definitely tricky. And when it comes to writing about other communities, you have to exercise all of those same things. There's been more and more awareness these days about appropriating other people's voices. And what happens when you do that is there's a good chance you're going to get things wrong, right? And any of us can be in that position if we're trying to write about communities that we're not part of. And one of the ways that I've tried to handle that, especially with secondary characters who are part of communities that I'm not part of, is to have beta readers from those communities who can say, no, you got that wrong, change it to this, or no, that is great, go ahead, you know? So I think it's all about exercising a lot of caution and respect.
So another question that has come in is, if someone has never read anything you've written, would you suggest they start with your first book or 7 or what?
Gosh, I don't know. You know, you feel differently about every single book you write. The first novel, I didn't even think I would have it be published, you know? It was like, the experience was, can I finish this book? And I wrote it in the early 2000s, and it got published in 2007. And when I look back at it, I'm proud of it, but I think, oh my God, look at all those mistakes. But probably readers don't see all the things that I'm so self-conscious about. I don't know. I'm very fond of all of the books. You know, when you write these novels, you become, it's almost like you do a dissertation. You become like a bit of an expert on, you know, whatever issues you're writing about, because you have to do so much research. And so you get invested in all of them. You care about the characters. You still like dream about the characters and think about, so they're all like important to me. And I feel like it would be wrong to say, you know, read that one and then the other 3 will feel bad or something. It's ridiculous answer.
Well, I will give the answer, because as I said in the beginning, I've read everything you've written. Chances are I will read everything that you will write. So I would say start with one and just continue through, because they're all really wonderful stories. And you lose yourself. You lose yourself in your narratives. Like, it's when you start on a Friday because you don't have to work that weekend. And by the next day, you realize you haven't slept very much because you just like go through the story and that's it.
So that's
So
fun.
wonderful,
Like just
wonderful. Your whole, pardon?
It's so fun to be so immersed in a story, right?
It is.
Like,
it is
one of my favorite things.
And it's because you can smell and you can see and you can feel. I mean, it's kind of writing where you do get lost in it, you know, and you kind of forget when sundown and sun up, and you just keep on reading, which is, for me, that's what a novel's all about. I absolutely love it.
Just one thing I would say is, I think what book 1 and book 3 are a little lighter emotionally than 2 and 4.
Okay, that could be a hint. The next is a comment and a comment. First of all, this person thanks us, the library, for this program. So I thank you very much. And thanks to Ms. Doctor for this important book. I'm an Indo-Canadian, and I wanted to say this book resonated with me in lots of ways. I especially loved the character of Murtaza. I wanted to ask you about writing about the various choices we make as parents and worrying about their consequences. Your book made me think a lot. Thanks again.
Thank you. So the various choices we make as parents, yeah. So, you know, the Sharifa and Murtaza in this book, they are flawed people. You have to have your characters be flawed for them to feel real, I think, because we're all so flawed, right? So they have great intentions. They're working so hard. They're quite conscious of what they're doing most of the time. But they do end up making some missteps, I think, in this book. And I think I just wanted that to be part of this story, because sometimes we very innocently make mistakes that have big impacts on children, right? I think about a lot of the clients that I see in my psychotherapy practice. I think quite a lot of them suffered from innocent mistakes by their parents. Yeah.
So I have another update for you from Diane. So her last name is Diane Sonley, Sonley. Her married name is Diane Simpson, not Office. She might have been using an email from that, and that's what popped up. So now you know who your old babysitter was.
Yes.
Isn't that so wonderful?
That's so amazing.
I just love this. I love this small world. Here's another question. Was there any part of the book that was emotionally difficult for you to write?
For sure. So, the process of writing this book, I've never done this before with a novel. This novel kind of stands out in terms of its process. So I had been quite involved in the beginning stages of activism, and I was pretty busy. I was still sort of promoting All Inclusive, my third novel. And so there wasn't much time available. When you're promoting, you don't do a lot of new writing, but I was waking up in the morning with an urge to write. So with my morning cup of coffee in bed and a notebook, I was just writing scenes. And I realized after writing 20 of these scenes that this was the novel that I was going to write. And so that was like, I'm saying this because that was the emotional kind of place I was in. Really, really busy in my writing life. Exploring this activism, which was not emotionally light. And then I was also doing healing around these issues as well. So my brain was basically exploding. So that started to calm down over time. But, many of these scenes are kind of painful, right? And while this is not a memoir, it is fiction, I resonated with the characters. I resonated with a lot of the characters a lot of the time, right? Because I was working through my own stuff while also writing these characters. So it was like being in a therapy group at various points. And, you don't just write the scene once and then it's done. For me, I probably do about, 10 rewrites to, 10, I'll just keep churning and editing until the scene sounds the best it can be for me. And I would say, also the epilogue. So without giving anything away for people who haven't read the book yet, the epilogue came last. I didn't have it initially, when I first had it sent out to my agent and she started sending it out to publishers. It was a few months later, she suggested that maybe I want to write an epilogue, that there were some things I needed to tie up. So she gave me some ideas about how I might want to think about the epilogue. And I started writing the epilogue and it came so easily. It's like a lot of writing doesn't come, easily in a burst like that, but this came in a burst. And I found myself just crying for this character. And I mentioned earlier for the audiobook, I read the epilogue, and the epilogue is a scene I'll probably never read aloud because it's all spoilers, right? So I was sitting in the studio and needing to read it, and I found myself skipping over the words. And Ajith Parkal, who is the director, was like, "No, do that again. You missed this word and this word." And to just read a few pages took many times. He had to interrupt me because I think I was just full of feeling. So yes, there were some scenes, and then just to offer some balance, because I want to make it really clear to readers that this book does have a lot of lightness too. There were lots of scenes that I laughed and I thought about people I knew and relatives, and I really tried to build in the quirky details of how people talk and behave and crack jokes and all of that. So I also did that probably for me.
I'll do a little spoiler alert to, I think most people probably have read your book who are on this visit, but I will say that there's quite a sex scene in there. So if you haven't read the book, you want to read it and find it.
Oh my goodness, my childhood babysitter is in here.
So
I can just imagine. Anyway, go ahead.
it's all about human nature. A comment from another of our guests is, thanks. I love Farzana Doctor's responses. And then another question is, Farzana, could you please repeat the name of the organization that you mentioned near the start of your talk? I wrote down nfgm.ca, but I think I got it wrong. So
it's end. Should I put it? Can I put it in the Q&A? Just I'll type it in, or maybe one of you can type it in so I don't mess things up. So it's nfgm.ca. Is that good?
nfgm.
No, it's end as an END. END.
Oh, this is the problem with it. endfgm.ca as opposed to the letter N. That's where our guest and I had the problem. So it's as in end, fgm.ca.
Yes. And if you're on Twitter, you can find them too at Canada FGM.
Thank you.
And I encourage people to join their mailing list.
Great. Another very good question we have here, very interesting. Do you consider male circumcision as a form of sexual abuse?
It's a good question, and a lot of people ask it. So I want people to think about FGM as a social norm that needs to change, and it is a form of abuse. And I think that male circumcision is also a social norm that needs to change and is a form of abuse. They're different. I think maybe historically they come from the same roots of wanting to control sexuality, but over time, the meanings of how they exist and FGM is really about misogyny today, and male circumcision is just considered to be a rite of passage, right? Sometimes religiously done, sometimes it's not religious at all, and it's just, dad looks like this, so son needs to look like this. But the issue here is that these things happen without consent. So it's about bodily autonomy, and it's about respecting the bodies of children and letting children make, letting adults make decisions, not doing this on behalf of children. Another similarity, there is a robust movement growing as well of people who are against male circumcision, and many of them talk about how it does cause bodily harm as well. And I think, even if trauma is happening on a body at the newborn stage, that doesn't mean that the newborn body doesn't register the trauma. It might not be remembered in terms of a narrative way, but the trauma will be remembered in the body implicitly. So plenty of similarities, but also some social differences.
Another comment is, I was not aware that female cutting was done, especially here in Canada. Thank you for writing about this topic and bringing it to our attention.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for listening. Yeah.
Do we have any other? Do we have any other questions? We will ask for any other questions. Please put them in now, or you're not going to get them answered. No other questions? In that case, as the evening comes to a close, I would like to thank the Writers' Union of Canada, whose funding for authors to read in public venues made this event possible. Farzana, for sharing your most fabulous book with us. To Lucy Frichette for tech support, and most especially to our guests for spending your evening with us. Good night and stay safe, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.